right, 4th and Long. Welcome to episode 6 of the 2019 season. My goodness, Randy and I were just talking before we started recording here. It's like the trades are coming in hot and heavy, so we'll get to a few of those later on. But first, Randy, how was the week that was fantasy wise?
Well, I didn't get the result that I wanted to again, but uh, looking forward to this week. Looking forward to a bunch of these trades. I guess the guys didn't draft as well as they thought. They all don't like their teams anymore. They're just trading like crazy.
Well, that's true. I mean, everybody's been involved in I think one for sure. So it's good. It's what we wanted, right? We wanted to see more action,
Well,
and now we're getting it, and it's pretty interesting. Well, let's just put shit before the shovel, if we will. Randy, who is your fantasy bust of the week?
my fantasy bust was one of your guys was Derrick Henry, running back of the Titans. Uh, pretty, he's been doing pretty good all season, as I'm pretty sure you can attest to. Except for this past week, he had 28 rushing yards and 5 receiving yards. It was the first time this year he failed to reach double digits for a usually pretty solid guy. I mean, I know he was playing a tough Broncos defense, but they held him to less than 2 yards per carry. Uh, but then, even when you think about the matchup, he got 78 and a touchdown against a good Buffalo defense, and then 44 and a touchdown against a good Jags defense. So he has played well against good defenses before, just got burned this time. Um, it's the kind of thing I don't. Well, we'll have to see how things go, or you'll definitely have to see how things go going forward. But with the Titans quarterback situation, now they want Tannehill starting. Does this help Henry or does it hurt him? Because now teams aren't going to look to the passing game. They're gonna stack up the box and try to stop Henry with the run, because that's the main part of the Titans offense. So yeah, hopefully he's not a bust for you for too many times this season. I mean, unless you play me again.
Yeah, I know it's pretty interesting, but like just quickly on your point before I jump in on my guy, I think with Mariota being benched and you're bringing in Tannehill, yeah, Tannehill's actually started for a franchise for a couple seasons. But he hasn't played in a while, so a lot of the time the teams will look to force the run game just to get the quarterback's feet wet. So I would be shocked if Derrick Henry has another bust week, but I have said a lot of things this year and they have not come true, so I'm not going to hold my breath. But yeah, crazy,
Yeah.
frustrating week, especially like you say, he is on my team, so I'll comment to that. It's pretty frustrating when you're supposed to have this, what you call an RB1, and when they don't reach projections, it's like, well, shit. Now what? So, speaking of
Yeah, but
fantasy,
you
yeah,
are starting them this week, though, right?
yes, I am.
Well,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a vote of confidence from Brian, at least.
yeah, exactly. Fantasy bus player of the week for me, we might as well stick on my shitty roster. Jimmy Graham. This guy is an absolute fucking plug, and I can't stand it. 1.7 points, 5 targets, 2 receptions for a total of 17 yards. There's 100 yards in a football field. They drive it multiple times during a game, and this guy gets 17 yards. Um, what's frustrating is that matchup was very close between me and Cody. He did not have the best week, and actually Jimmy Graham had 2 good looks for touchdowns that he did not come down, and that would have been double dipping since I've acquired Aaron Rodgers. So that would have really put me over the edge. But of course, Jimmy Graham can't connect on one. He's only got 26.9 points on the season. That's an average of 4.5 fantasy points a week, and only 2 touchdowns this year. And the next 2 weeks, he better pick it up. And I thought about trading, dropping, doing something because I'm just getting frustrated with the tight end position. But the next 2 weeks, he's got his best chances of all year. He's playing Oakland, who allows the sixth most to the tight end, and the following week is Kansas City, whose defense, as we're watching, is just atrocious, and they allow the ninth most to the tight end. So if Jimmy Graham ever has an opportunity to wake up and exploit some defenses, it's in the next 2 weeks. But my God, he has been frustrating over the last few fantasy seasons.
Yeah, I'm willing to send you to Lady Walker if you want a guy who hasn't scored a touchdown since week one. I need to upgrade the tight end position, but that's more trade talk here going. Hopefully I can get a trade going for that. But like I said, I'll have to give up something for my good roster for that because there aren't that many great tight ends. Even though there have been a couple new ones that have come to the fold this season, they're hard to come by. That's for sure.
Exactly. So, speaking of tight ends, let's just continue on. I'm just going to keep going with the fantasy surprise player of the week, and this might shock you, but I'm choosing Hunter Henry from the Chargers. He's general manager's misfits who acquired him on Sunday, actually. He got 22 points, 9 targets, 8 receptions for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a career high for him in yards. Finally back from the injury since week one. Mind you, he didn't play a lot last year anyway, as we remember. He has an average of 7.8 points over the last 14 games going back to the start of 2017. And actually, think of all the tight ends we always talk about, okay, before I say this. Hunter Henry is tied for 4th best of 38 qualified tight ends for fantasy points per game. The league average is 3.3 points. So if you think of all the tight ends that are supposed to be amazing, right? Hunter Henry is actually 4th. So that's pretty interesting stat that I came across. I feel like Nigel benched him. I feel bad for Nigel that he benched him after acquiring him for Sunday Night Football, but I believe Hunter Henry was questionable going into Sunday night, so I don't really blame him. But when you got a guy who's on your bench who gets 22 in a position that we always hammer here, I feel for Nigel. But Rivers definitely will be happy to have a good weapon back in Hunter Henry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Especially someone on a shorter route because that offensive line in LA is not very good.
Exactly. Who do you got?
Well, my fantasy surprise probably is not quite as surprising as your pick. Ironically, Devontae Freeman, running back for the Atlanta Falcons.
Haven't heard that name in a while.
Yeah, in our league, Clueless has him. 23.8 points on the strength of 2 receiving touchdowns, but he also got himself 88 rushing yards and 30 receiving yards. Hey, for a guy who only a couple of seasons ago was a 1,000-yard rusher, obviously didn't play very much last year and has kind of struggled to be a real fantasy threat this year. But in Clueless's flex position, he only has 3 receiving touchdowns all season. 2 of them came this past week. No rushing touchdowns, so basically not getting any touchdowns at all on the ground. And actually, 203 receiving yards on the season for 275 rushing yards. So this is a multifaceted player. I think we've mentioned this on the podcast before that the Atlanta Falcons offense always seems to be chasing the game, or at least trying to keep up, so the run game doesn't get used that much, as evidenced by these stats. They do a lot more passing. But like I said, as far as the surprise goes, it's only the second time this season he has reached 100 combined yards, which for a starting running back is pretty low. Like I said, only a couple of seasons ago he was a 1,000-yard rusher, and this has kind of gone away on him. That just seems to be the way, like I mentioned, how this Falcons offense runs. Everything goes through the air. I'm hoping. I just wonder what Kelly's going to do with Matt Ryan once Drew Brees comes back, or vice versa. What he'll do with Brees once he comes back, because certainly was quite the coup to pick him up when Brees went down. We'll have to see what goes on with that. But yeah, Devontae Freeman, a big surprise because he hasn't done much this year.
No, that's true. Yeah, and I'd be curious to see how they continue to use him if now that they got him going. But yeah, that Atlanta defense, they need to. That I don't know what's going on in Atlanta, but Freeman starting to pick up a little bit here, like you mentioned. So let's just move on and we'll finish this off because we got, I think, a few trades to talk about near the end after our news segment. So we'll keep rolling here. The fantasy highlight player of the week for me, I never thought. I mean, he is a rookie, but I'm going with Kyler Murray. He's from the Connor roll, so Dylan's team. 34 fantasy points, just shy of 35, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns. I think what's an interesting stat here is zero interceptions, zero sacks. Of course, that's always impressive as a rookie, especially Arizona's offensive line. And that's the first week this season where he didn't somehow either throw an interception or get sacked. So definitely an improvement from Murray's perspective. First time he's gotten over 30 plus fantasy points as well. And what's interesting here too is we always think of these names and you don't come across certain names like Kyler Murray, but actually he's quietly placed himself inside the top 8 for fantasy scoring quarterbacks. So something, either he's doing something or something's weird happening in the league because for him to be inside the top 8 with big names, mind you, I can think of 2 that got hurt already. But interesting. I mean, we kind of gave. I know I personally gave Dylan a shot. Like, what the hell are you doing drafting that guy? But obviously, it could potentially be paying off here. And he's got another matchup this week for Kyler Murray that could potentially pay off too because the Giants' secondary is super bad. So obviously, he's playing the Giants, so that could be another favorable matchup for Dylan in the quarterback position. So kudos to Kyler Murray for setting the tone here in week 6.
Yes, yes, I saw that one of his. Well, definitely his best game as a not just NFL wise, but his best game fantasy wise of his rookie season.
Yeah.
Definitely looked good on the opposite end of my game. Unfortunately, he didn't do me any favors by having that good game now. But hey, what's done is done. So moving on to my highlight, probably not much of a shock here is Stefan Diggs, wide receiver for the Vikings. Global warming has him there that week, although we may talk about where he might be going, might be on the move here coming for next week. But either way, 167 receiving yards, which is pretty good on its own. 18 rushing yards is kind of a side thing. 3 touchdowns to add on to that. 36.5 points, man. What a way to break out of your funk because he was in a real funk. I almost could have had him as fantasy surprise, except this sort of game is not that much of a surprise. He should have been doing stuff like this in games before this. Because this was especially a pretty close fight. Devil Raiders put up a pretty good fight against global warming in that game. But these 36.5 points is the difference between basically 99 points and 130. So this was huge in this one. With the defenses all focusing on Cook and then Thielen having a good game last week, or I should say the week before, it was Diggs' turn to finally get loose out there with some real good bomb touchdowns and a really good back of the end zone touchdown too. Man, like I said, what a time to finally break out here, right when Ryan needed him.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting and and you said he was on the move. So can you let our audience know where Stefan Diggs will end up this upcoming week?
Well, funny you should ask because Ryan proposed a trade for me. The trade was for 2 wide receivers, Stefan Diggs, and I'm sending him Robert Woods out of LA, and we're flipping a 7th and an 8th round pick here too.
What?
So yeah, Diggs is heading my way, and I'm going to be, if I wasn't heavy enough on the Vikings before, I'm going to be even heavier now.
Well, there's always potential, and obviously we'll break that down at the end of this if we can get around to it, because obviously you guys are bringing in so many trades. We want to make sure we get everything as best we can here. But I just thought it'd be a good mention that to find out where Diggs is obviously going. So yeah, no, it's about time. I mean, interesting. Like they were running the ball like crazy, and then both the wide receivers put on a bit of a diva act or call Kirk Cousins. Thielen has an unreal week, and then Diggs has an unreal week. So Are they going to go back to the run game now, knowing that both wide receivers are happy in Minnesota? I don't know, but
I think they probably still will. I mean, like, I also have Delvin Cook on my lineup too, and uh, you know, he hasn't been getting as many touches, but he's still getting touchdowns. He's still getting lots of opportunities. So it's not like they totally went away from him. They're just actually starting to mix it up a bit, which is dangerous for the whole Vikings lineup. Maybe I can get Kirk Cousins in a trade from whoever has him now. I know he's been flipped a couple times this year, so maybe I'll get him. And then week 12, I just won't start anybody.
well, we'll see about that when it actually comes down to it. But yeah, sometimes being heavy on one team is never a good thing, right? So we'll see what you do when you acquire Diggs and the rest of your Vikings roster. But for
Well,
now,
yeah, so
yeah,
exactly. I'm gonna have to do something for week 12 because I don't know if I have enough uh, bench players to fill those holes.
yeah. Well, that's just recapping the high, the surprise, and the low of the week that was. And now, obviously, we're going to roll into the news segment again. We got a couple teams left that we need to discuss in each of the divisions, and obviously, you guys know the trend here on what we've been doing. So, with the NFC, I'd like to break down global warming. Just a little bit how we got to 3-3, and surprisingly, I don't even think Ryan can believe it either. But he's currently second place. He's leading the NFC. That's why he gets the second place title because he's a division leader. He's averaging 94 points a week, which historically is very low for this particular GM. He's 3-1 in the division, and and although he's had the fifth fewest points for, so he's getting it done. He's a leader in moves, 13 moves. I'm sure he's made a couple more since I wrote that note, and he's been involved in a few trades as well. On his wins, he's won week one. He beat Old Dirty Bastard, who is currently 12th place, by 6 points. He beat me, Screaming Beavers, week three by 10 points, and he just recently beat Devil Raiders Kelly, as you mentioned, who's currently 7th place by 17 points. So his wins are an average by about 11 points. This is where it gets interesting. His losses, week two to the Bears, they're currently 9th by 28 points. Week 4 to the Connor Roll, who's currently 5th by 37 points. And week 5 to Clueless, who's currently 3rd by 68 points. His losses are an average of 44 points. So when he wins, it's usually pretty close. And when he loses, it's quite the blowout. So it's just an interesting pattern there. So who knows? He's at 500, so who knows what the next games will bring. Some of the highlights for him are obviously his quarterback, which unfortunately did not fare well last night, but just a little bit. 15 touchdowns, 1 interception, 8 sacks, 176 fantasy points so far, and he started off very hot, as we all know, potential MVP, and really still could be. 3 straight 30-plus games, but he's definitely cooled off since. An 18-point outing, an 18-point outing, a 25-point outing, and last night, although injured, was 9 points. So now we're going to see how that injury affects Ryan, but I believe he was just involved in a trade, so we're going to get back to that later on. Another highlight for him is Chris Carson from Seattle. 504 rush yards, 2 touchdowns, 140 reception yards, 2 touchdowns for a total of 82 points. And that actually ranks Carson as 9th best running back this year out of all the league. So he's found himself a pretty decent running back that normally doesn't really get high up on the draft board. Some of the lowlights for Ryan, his wide receiver depth. He's got 0 bench spots that are allocated to the wide receiver position. He got Hopkins via a trade, Ridley, Diggs, which Randy just mentioned was traded. 10 touchdowns between the 3 wide receivers through 6 games, and he's acquiring Woods, who has 0 touchdowns, and I think Diggs has 4 touchdowns. So interesting that he's reduced his touchdown value. Too many non-producing running backs. He's got 5 bench running backs, total of 7 touchdowns through 6 weeks. And the names aren't really even trade bait, actually, although, again, he traded a guy, as I say this, outside of Williams, who he just acquired, basically because he plays for Kansas City. So he might maybe need to move some of these pieces to acquire some more wide receiver depth. Trades, just like I said, he's the most active guy in the league when it comes to a few of these things. And just some big names involved here before I let you go, Randy, here. At the start of the season, global warming, had Tyreek Hill, Alshon Jeffrey, and Matt Ryan. He traded Matt Ryan for Mack and Shepard on September 18th. He traded Hill for Barkley on the 25th of September. He traded Shark Jr. for Diggs on the 28th. And then he traded Barkley and Jeffrey for Hopkins and Williams on the 11th. So he's had big names on his rosters, but they were just never filling the void or fitting the pieces. So he continued to move, and obviously he had the pieces to do so. Based on the remaining projections, and I know sometimes players on buys are left in there, he's about to go on a 2-5 run according to Yahoo, which would bring his overall record to 5-8. But like I just said, obviously there's people on bye weeks in the roster. But looking up the matchups and his current roster, I think Ryan will finish about 7-6, maybe 8-5. So definitely playoff bound. Some really good potential on this team. But I think if he could just move some of those non-producing running backs for a couple more wide receiver positions, I think he can build himself a better depth roster.
Yeah, fair enough. And like we've seen, he certainly has it in him to make a few trades. He's done a few this year. He had the big trade last year as well. Certainly looking forward to see just what he does and what other trade offers he sends throughout the league.
Yep.
So in my division, the AFC division, I'm going to be looking at the Connor roll. This is Dylan's team. He is 4-2 on a 4-game win streak, actually. So started out really rough and has really picked it up. So what has been the big reason for this 4-game win streak? Well, we'll talk about some of the big players here. James Conner, who is quietly having a good year. You haven't heard as much about him as you did last year, but he's doing all right. Mark Ingram has been a real big plus for him. This revitalized Ravens offense, driven mostly by Lamar Jackson, but you know what? They don't like putting Lamar Jackson in at the goal line, and that's why Mark Ingram has 7 touchdowns on the ground this season. And even though Jackson is leading the Ravens in rushing, hey, touchdowns get you lots of points too. So Mark Ingram has been a real good fantasy player this year. Mike Evans, we've talked about him a couple times on the podcast here. He's had some huge games in recent weeks, obviously proving he's still a deep threat, as his average is 17 yards per catch. Travis Kelce, he didn't have a great day there on Thursday, and he only has 1 touchdown, which is pretty low. But I noticed there he is 7th in the league in receiving yards as a tight end, so he's no bust either this year. Although a few more touchdowns would look good on the fantasy line. And this 49ers defense especially, they're not as flashy as the Bears or the Patriots, but they get the job done, and they've got those Niners at 5-0, and they've been doing it, playing pretty good defense and giving Dylan some pretty solid numbers. Some of his weaker points, obviously, he's got quite a few players. He's actually got 2 players on the IR. I'm looking at his roster right now. Sterling Shepard and Jalen Samuels are both on IR. Deshaun Jackson is listed as out, but there's only so many IR positions, so he's just sitting on the bench, can't play. And Jay Ajayi is also inactive, listed as inactive. He's also taking up a spot on the bench. As far as what the future holds for this team, Melvin Gordon is back. He's not quite impactful yet, but the Chargers are definitely working him into the offense. As you had mentioned as well, Kyler Murray just had a great game this week. He's not lighting up the league full-time yet, but, like you said, that could be turning around with some good matchups coming up. So the future might look good. Except for now, this week might be a tough one to get by because a couple of his big players, James Conner and Mike Evans, are both on the bye. And he's had to fill them in with David Montgomery here at the flex position, and then Michael Gallup and Mike Williams are his starting wide receivers. Not quite as dangerous as you would think, especially with Mike Evans anchoring it. So we'll have to see just how things go here going forward. But there are some pretty solid pieces of this roster. I'd be shocked if he didn't do well this year, make the playoffs for sure. I would think.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, most of your division in the AFC is 4-2. So even with his loss, he would still be as good as Ryan if Ryan won and the leading the NFC. So
Mm-hmm.
he's in a position to do and still have the direct path to the playoff potentially, especially when, like you said, he's on a 4 game win streak. But we'll see if those pieces can come together. That have, like you mentioned, either they get hot or cold, depending on your bye matchups. I think one thing, I'm not sure if you did mention him, so I apologize. But I mean, he's got a wide receiver on his bench who could be a lethal threat, and that's D-Jack from Philly. But he's hurt, so he's definitely
Mm-hmm.
got the injury bug, which limits him. And I think we've seen the cool down factor of Jameis Winston. But we'll see if that bye week can spark something in Tampa Bay to get Mike Evans back up in some big wide receiver points. Um, but yeah, no, he's got an interesting team, that's for sure. And like you said, he's back. And I know a lot of people were passing. I know global warming had him as a keeper and decided not to keep him. But Melvin Gordon, there's potential that could really bring some promise to this team, especially when you get to those playoff weeks. So I think that was a good pickup in the draft by Dylan. Okay, so that's
Shall
kind
we
of,
talk about some of these trades here?
well, we'll have to. We got to go chronologically, right? So there's been so many of them, but that kind of breaks down our matchups, and our teams. We'll do another one next week, or we might have something around the corner, a little bit of a surprise in the next podcast. Okay, I think we left off with the Saquon Barkley and Hopkins trade, I believe, correct?
I think so.
So the next trade I have here is Shelly told me to traded Josh. Let me see if I read that right. Yes, sorry. Um, Shelly told me to traded Josh Jacobs. Wait, sorry, my screen is being funny.
Yeah, yeah. It's Josh Jacobs and a fifth round pick for Matt Breida, and also a fifth round pick to Shelly Tolby to. Shelly Tolby to gets Matt Breida in the fifth rounder, and
Right.
Texas Walker Rangers gets Josh Jacobs
Right.
and a other.
That's not a bad trade. I think the draft pick is a good swap. I don't even know why they really needed to include that. I think they probably did that based on the fact that Josh Jacobs has just been hitting the end zone a couple more times than Breda. Plus, Breda's more involved in the committee back system. So I think this is a really good running back trade. I think there's not much more to say about it.
Yeah, it was certainly a sell high moment for Matt Breida, who had that great Monday night game. The Niners in general had that great Monday night game. Uh, Again, I like this Josh Jacobs, this kid um, at running back, but he's not super impactful just yet. But I think he gets more opportunities. So, but we'll have to see how this one turns out. It's a
Yeah.
pretty decent trade.
And then we did, myself and Clueless, we did a little swap there. I picked up Marvin Jones Jr. and gave him Philip Dorsett the second. That was just basically to free up some roster spaces for acquisitions, and it benefited both teams. So, as you can see, I'll just skip forward. We flipped the roster spots back because we felt we wanted our guys, and they just worked both weeks. So, but in between that, we had another trade, which you alluded to, Cousins being flipped. So I gave Cody, Texas Walker, Kirk Cousins, and a fifth round pick, and I received Aaron Rodgers and a sixth round pick. Now, the reason I did this was Carson Wentz was my quarterback I drafted. That was my primary quarterback. He's gotten more points than Kirk Cousins. He had more points than Aaron Rodgers, but I felt like I wasn't sure the direction Philly was going, and I knew Cody was looking to move Aaron Rodgers. So the reason I did this was to basically plug and play based on matchups. Now it hurts me to know that Kirk Cousins had the week he did, but in my opinion, for a fifth and a sixth for a quarterback, that's usually when most people are probably looking to draft a quarterback. So I really have no issues, in my opinion, on my side on this trade.
Yeah, as far as that one goes, neither Cousins nor Rogers, for that matter, have really hit the level that you would expect out of them fantasy wise. And both those quarterbacks, as good as they are, and as much as they're recognizable names, they were both on your guys' bench because um, I believe Cody was playing Dak and you were playing Wentz, like you said, sticking in the AFC East. So instead, you guys flipped some NFC East, and then you guys flipped some NFC North quarterbacks there. But yeah, just kind of I from what I see it, I think both you guys are expecting the quarterbacks that you received to do better in the future going forward, as opposed to looking at how their first quarter of this season has started. I think both you guys are looking for these guys to become your starters,
I
or at
think
least
so.
you're definitely open to, or else you wouldn't have traded them, right? So
I think so, yeah. And I think for myself, being 1-5, yeah, it's not really a desperation move, but it's definitely like, the coach, right? You're 1-5. You got to shake up the lineup, and I was able to do that, and I'm okay with that. The next trade is I'm just going to go to the ones that are currently pending. Um, this is let's just go to yours. So Ryan is trading uh, Stephon Diggs and a seventh round pick, like you mentioned, to yourself for Robert Woods and an eighth round pick. Um, I know your opinion on it, and I've already told you mine off the air, and I talked to Ryan. I believe that you won this trade pretty handily, actually. I think Diggs is a better receiver. I think you gained a better draft pick round. You moved up a round, and you don't even really need to play Diggs if you don't want to. I'm not really sure what Ryan was trying to acquire. I know Ryan was pretty proud of the trade value of Diggs and how he could move him. Robert Woods is obviously in a pretty decent offense. They're just having issues right now. I'd be curious to see if you keep Diggs or try to flip him for something else. But in my opinion, I know Ryan won't like this, but I think you won this trade.
well, I think it's a case where I've been trying to think, because when I saw this, I thought, wait a minute, I I kind of thought that maybe the draft picks were switched, like he wanted to move up in the draft, and I thought that might be a little more even, but no, he offered me the advantage in both, and I thought, okay, so what's up with Diggs that he doesn't want him anymore? Part of my reasoning might have been just that, well, you know what, when you've got a guy on your roster, and you know, like I mentioned when I made him the highlight, is that he has 4 touchdowns and 3 of them were in this last game, so he obviously hasn't hit his stride this year. So I think Ryan just got burned one too many times by Diggs, and he just said, I don't want him anymore. Um, he's obviously he's obviously going to assume that Robert Woods is going to be the better wide receiver going forward, or like I mentioned with the quarterbacks you guys flipped there, he wouldn't make the trade if he didn't think Woods wasn't worth getting. I don't think Ryan is not really the kind of GM to kind of hold a grudge against the fantasy player and trade him for nothing. So I'm pretty sure that's what was behind this one. But hey, I'll take it. Like you said, certainly if it's a sell high kind of thing, I can definitely use Diggs in the lineup for now, since Amari Cooper is still out and the Cowboys bye week's coming up too. It certainly is a welcome thing for me, at least for now. But you're right. Uh, when Cooper gets healthy and when he comes back off the bye, that wide receiver core is going to be pretty crowded. I'm going to have to trim that down, and I'll have 3 studs at wide receivers. I can definitely offer one up and see what kind of bites, see what kind of trades I can get in for one of those 3.
Well, moving on to another trade that's pending between the Connor Roll and global warming. The Connor Roll will be sending David Montgomery and Sam Darnold to global warming for Calvin Ridley. That would put global warming over the roster spots, so he has decided to drop Tariq Cohen. We know Mahomes is hurt, and that's why Ryan is probably in need of a quarterback. There's nothing wrong with Sam Darnold based on what we've kind of seen him do. He's going to have a tough test this Monday night against the Pats. That defense looks something fierce, so we'll see what he does there. I'm not even really going to go look at transactions because we're kind of running out of time here. But I already mentioned to you that he has Hopkins, Ridley, and Diggs. He just got rid of Ridley, did not acquire a wide receiver, and traded Diggs for Woods. So obviously he's just going to go with two wide receivers unless he makes transactions. I I really don't have an issue with this trade. I think Ryan's hands were tied. He needed a quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. And this is definitely a sell high idea with getting rid of Ridley, who who's definitely had had slow points earlier in the year and also played well. Also has played well recently. So this is definitely a sell high for him.
And our last trade that's currently pending, or at least for this episode, is Shelley told me to. He'll be trading Miles Sanders and Vance McDonald and a 10th round pick to the Devils Raiders for Adrian Peterson, Jason Witten, and a 10th round pick. Um, I like the pick swap. I think it's pretty standard here. They're swapping running backs and a tight end position here. Obviously, it's pretty clean. I think Kelly definitely upgraded with Sanders over Peterson in the run game, and Selby upgraded in the tight end position. So I don't really have an issue with this trade. I think it's kind of level. I think these guys did pretty good.
Yeah, that is exactly my assessment too. One guy got a slightly better running back, and the other got a slightly better tight end. Uh, no real big names in this one. I mean, maybe Sanders has the has the potential to be something bigger, but as of right now, they're not doing that much. That much are kind of middle of the road sort of RB2, maybe flex position type players, and like we've mentioned the tight end position many times. Other than the top four, there's not much out there, so there's not much harm in flipping your tight end if you're not in the top four.
Yeah, no, exactly. Interesting though, and just a quick side note here as I go back to transactions to see if anything happened with global warming. He seems to be the GM of the episode, if you will. He dropped Dallas's defense and picked up Tariq Cohen today, which would have been an ad to only drop him today in a trade. Interesting move there. Ryan, please comment on the Facebook page. um, but that kind of concludes it. Sorry, guys, this one went a little bit longer than normal, but again, you guys have so much action out here in the league. We want to try to do our best to break it down. And of course, when the podcast is up, if you guys ever want to chime in and tell us we're an idiot, well, yeah, go ahead. We've heard worse. But we quite enjoy this and enjoy your guys' feedback and comments. And yeah, looking forward to the week that is. Interesting note. Myself and Jake are playing each other, and Corey and Kelly are playing each other. So it's the Battle of the Brotherhood this weekend in 4th and Long.
Yeah, yeah. Whoever made the schedule certainly did something with that one to kind of keep things interesting.
Yeah. So, anyways, guys, have a good weekend of football. All the best of luck to your rosters, and if you bring in any more trades, we'll talk about them next week. So, have a good weekend, guys.
See you, boys.